is sunshine.
The public narrative, and that's the piece of work that we're doing. And we're learning from other social movements and campaigns, and we're employing the science and methodology of framing to do that, which is really a conscious effort to attend to what our message is and the visual story we tell cause people to think and feel, and what that motivates them to do, to believe, or to seek in the world. Now, the godfather, if you like, of framing, George Lakoff, has said that frames are mental structures that shape the way we see the world. And in politics, our frames shape our social policies and the institutions we form to carry out policies. So changing framing it's not just a communications thing. Changing frames is to change all of that. Framing is part of social change. Okay? We're not alone. A number of other movements are embracing this methodology. Perhaps the most well-known example in recent years has been the very successful campaigns for equal marriage, which involved a conscious shift from talking about the civil rights of LGBT groups to emphasising messages of family and love and relationships and civil union, and that message of equal marriage, that idea of getting away from otherness to the idea of equality, has been hugely successful as a motor for that change. But in the UK right now, a number of other organisations are using these methodologies and developing them. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has a major project to reframe the way we think and talk about poverty. There is work going on in terms of how we message and talk about climate change, migration and immigration, human rights, a whole range of other fields. And one important thing for us is that we are in contact with those organisations and learning from them, and sometimes in alliance with them as well. A guiding principle of this work is really to try and shift the message from fear to hope. There's a communications specialist in the US called Annette Schenker-Rosario, and she's made the point really that Martin Luther King never ever gave a "I have a complaint" speech. We didn't need to do that to sense the injustice he was talking about. In fact, by giving that vision of hope and the potential of the future, he was able to reinforce the injustices much more powerfully. But if we look at the narrative around social care presently, we're not doing that. The narrative is overwhelmingly dominated by one of failure and crisis, and lacks a sort of sense of where we should be and what social care should be doing for people. So it's really about leading our messages not with problems, of messages of crisis and vivid case studies of what's going wrong, but with a compelling value-based vision of the world as we want it to be, how the solutions we advocate will take us there, and the changes that need to happen to make that a reality, the obstacles we need to remove that are presently in our way. And working on that requires research, which we've begun. We published the report on the screen last month. What that looked at is what the current narrative is. So we looked at how the sort of dominant organisations in the sector that are campaigning for change messaged social care. We, with the University of Lancaster University rather, are able to kind of look at how the media talks about social care. So they've got a piece of software and analysed stories on social care for the last 2 years and comes up with kind of key messages that are embedded in those stories. And we've also done some work to just talk to the general public about how they think and feel about social care as well. So we've begun that research. But it's part of a kind of, I've got that other slide with the heart wiper. It's part of a kind of 4-step process there, where we begin by trying to really crystallise what the changes we're trying to bring about. We've been doing that today, because we've been here all afternoon. We're all looking a bit bleary-eyed, that's why. The landscape, which is the report that we just published, but we're doing further work on that. So Lancaster University at the minute are tracking how the political parties are talking about social care and how people are talking about social care on social media during the election, and we'll have a new report out in the new year on that. Then we need to take a deep look at mindsets. So how do the general public now talk and think about social care? So we'll be doing research into that. And then finally, and the crucial thing, persuasion. What sort of stories can we tell that really carry forward our values, our way of thinking about the world, that are sufficiently persuasive with public audiences to make them invest in our worldview and to move them in that direction? So it's a 4-stage research process which we've now begun. In Manchester earlier this year, we began to do some work on this and work out what our vision was. Could we kind of crystallise in kind of everyday terms? So there's a lot of language about asset-based approaches and co-production and so on. It's words that are just meaningless to the larger public. They're disconnected from this, important though they are. How could we actually turn our values and our way of thinking into a language that really was more effective at connecting? This is stuff that we've done without all the research yet, but we came up with this high-level vision, and we've begun to use it on social media and other contexts, and it seems to have had quite a bit of traction. And I'll explain what it's supposed to do in a second, but the vision really said, we all want to live in the place we call home, with the people and the things that we love, in communities where we look out for one another, doing the things that matter to us. And that very high-level vision, I think, paints a very different sense of what social care is, what it should do for us, what it's about, than much of the messages that you will hear in the media at the minute and that come out of organisations campaigning for change. But it deliberately doesn't other people, talks about something, shared values, something we should all want, we all desire. It talks about things that speak to personalisation, but in a way that everyone would get, doing things that matter to you. It speaks to the idea of reciprocity, the idea of being in communities where we do things for one another rather than just people being the objects of care and support. And crucially, I think, it talks about being able to choose where and with whom you live, being in the place you call home. We did an exercise in Manchester that wasn't kind of technical, it was kind of, what does home mean to you? And when people talk about home, they don't talk about a place and infrastructure, they talk about how they live their lives and privacy in their relationships and the things they feel. So it has a very kind of visceral sense of what home means. So that's what that's about. We need to do a lot more work on it. But that was our kind of starting point. And we did some further work there about the ways we imagined this working, how that was different from how social care works generally. So we talked about how great social care helps us all to achieve this vision by reviving our sense of hope and purpose, how it helps us all to keep or regain control over our lives, to connect and sometimes reconnect with the things that are most important to us, and to realise our potential. And in terms of the ask, something we've been trying to do is get a balance between the question Martin talked about before in terms of resources and our broader vision of how things should work, in saying that the government must commit more resources to our social care future, but to be sustainable, they have to also enact reforms to unlock the abundant resources and power to make change that already exist in individuals, in families and communities, that we need to make this social care future together. So we move away from this idea that it's simply a question of something the government alone can resolve, or that it's just a transactional service, towards this idea that we've heard about this morning, that it's about an ecosystem, it's about a whole range of things that come together to make the change that we want. But in terms of the public narrative, just quickly, this is a summary, but ultimately what we're hearing over and over again is that social care, which fails to look after vulnerable people adequately, leaving them to be neglected and abused, is broken and in or on the brink of a crisis. The cost of social care is spiralling because there are growing numbers of older and disabled people, and funding hasn't kept pace with demand. Councils, the NHS and providers are under severe strain. The system can't cope. Other valuable services are threatened. Only government can solve this, but governments for the past 20 years have failed to. The government's green paper, which keeps being delayed, probably won't change anything. We need an extra £3.5 billion immediately to plug the gap and shore up social care, but it's nowhere near enough to truly fix things. And if you need care today, you'll lose your home to pay for it, and it'll still be terrible. That is the message that is being given to the public time and time again. And we assume that that will motivate them to think social care is something that should be invested in and grown, and that's what we want to challenge and turn around. Thank you.
Cheers, Neil. Thanks.
Bring me sunshine